second thing is inflow, which is actual stormwater, rainwater, actively flowing into the sewer system during periods of peak wet weather. And then the last thing is clear water, which come from illegal connections such as your roof drains and sump pumps, and that's rainwater directly flowing from those connections into the sanitary sewer line. I have an asterisk on that one because it's really important as we talk about the holistic approach that we're taking here that we acknowledge the private property or the property owner impact here. EPA estimates at least 50% of the rainwater is actually coming from private property. Broken sewer laterals, sump pumps, all of those things that I just discussed. So municipalities can only do their part on the public portion of the system, and they need to make some hard choices or ask some hard questions about what they can do on the private side. So for example, a typical sewer lateral replacement might cost $3,000 to $6,000. And so a municipality that's struggling with that issue has to determine, should they pay for that to get the rainwater out? And how do they pay for that? Who should pay for that? Do they spread that across all customers or only make the customers that have the problems pay for that? It's a really challenging problem. Where do overflows occur? I have three pictures shown here. The one at the top left is what we call outfall 003. And that is a designed outfall at the treatment plant in Allentown that discharges to the Little Lehigh Creek untreated wastewater or raw sewage. And that discharge point is a specific point about 100 yards upstream of the confluence of the Little Lehigh and the Lehigh River. And that happens when the wastewater treatment plant is overwhelmed and can't treat the flow of water that's coming to it. Manholes do overflow along the Little Lehigh Creek as well as other locations throughout the system, and that's shown, a surcharging or overflowing manhole is shown in the top right. And then the bottom picture is a little hard to see, but that's a basement backup, and those do occur as well during both wet weather and non-wet weather type events where lines are either blocked or full, or there's bottlenecks within the smaller systems within the municipalities. EPA recommends an integrated approach to addressing this problem, and this is their graphic. I just borrowed from it. Unfortunately, the citation is cut off at the bottom, but I am citing EPA on this one, where they're recommending that a sustainable wet weather management program would include the pillars of treatment capacity, conveyance, storage capacity, and I&I reduction. And then also supported by that is a strong operations and maintenance program and an integrated planning approach. And so that's what we're trying to do. And I wanted to talk to you about the whole approach here so that we understand how the pieces fit together. I think it's really important. Lehigh County Authority are the communities we serve, the city of Allentown, and the communities that the Allentown serves. We're all working together on this integrated program, and it's centered around these four primary goals. Number one, most important, address the root cause. Get the groundwater, get the rainwater out of the system. That's what's causing the system to become overwhelmed. Number two, build a network to handle the peak flows. And that really relates to that large pipe network, the interceptor, the pump stations, the places where bottlenecks can occur if they're not large enough to handle current flows, future flows, wet weather flows. That network needs to be expanded and maintained. The third thing is effective treatment of wastewater. And of course, the water that comes into the system all goes downstream to Klein's Island. And so Klein's Island wastewater treatment plant has to have a method of treating what comes into the plant under all conditions. And then ongoing maintenance is really the backbone of the whole program, and ensuring that the system is maintained going forward and we solve the problem and don't have the problem come back to us. I have 2 slides worth of projects to share, and I'm not going to go over them because they're really detailed, facility specific. If you have questions about the specific facilities that are involved, I can go over that. But really wanted to talk about the phasing. So phase 1 is a period that we're recommending from 2018 to 2026, which is focused on getting leakage out of the system and then doing some specific kinds of expansions to kind of get through the first several years of the program, but really focusing on removing leakage from the system. And you can see the biggest price tag there is a $32 million project that the municipalities in Western Lehigh County are going to be taking on to do that. And then phase 2 goes on from 2027 forward to 2040, and includes several other very big ticket items and projects, but they are more focused on system expansion and treatment expansion to really address the problem long term. And we wanted to have the phased approach so that we could measure the results from phase 1 and then size the phase 2 projects accordingly, because the phase 2 projects are very expensive. And if we can get the rainwater out of the system in phase 1, then phase 2 can potentially be less expensive. And this is the summary of all the goals, all 4 goals, and how they stack up. So we have a total of $428 million estimated as our cost through 2040. And you can see really almost half of that is in the ongoing maintenance piece. And that's where every community that is served by this system needs to maintain their systems and work on preventive maintenance and asset management moving forward into the future. What I should note, though, that these numbers only represent Lehigh County Authority, the Western Lehigh communities that are part of our municipal signatory group, and the City of Allentown program. The other signatories are South Whitehall, Salisbury, Emmaus, Copley Whitehall Sewer Authority, and Hanover Township. The work that they're going to do is not yet known or planned, so that would be in addition to what's shown here. So really, I think what is important for the county commissioners to understand is what LCA's role really is in all of this. And I have to say, in a word, it's complicated. It's very complicated. We have a lot of relationships with municipalities that are by agreement, and we serve on behalf of those agreements and on behalf of those communities. So we don't actually own much of the system. We don't control much of the system. So what we are doing is on behalf of the municipalities that we serve. We don't control the growth and development that increases the capacity or the need for capacity in the system. That happens at the municipal level. And all the costs pass directly through Lehigh County Authority to the municipalities. So it's a real pass-through agency more than anything, both physically and financially. And then the piece of the city system has some complexities, which I'm going to get to in a later slide. Still, through all of this, a lot of organizations are looking to LCA for leadership on this issue, and we're trying to provide that. So again, I bring this map up just to, again, review and highlight that Lehigh County Authority's system that we actually own and can do anything about is simply the black line or dark red line that runs through the middle of the map. Everything else is owned by the municipality directly, and the collector systems, and then there's the private property piece that is in there too. Some components of the Allentown lease that I think are important. First of all, the city owns the system, number one, but they also have retained responsibility for the administrative order through the lease. That's a specific excluded liability within the lease structure. So the city has retained the right to decide and pay for the improvements that happen at Klein's Island Treatment Plant. And it's their responsibility to achieve compliance. Our role is to implement what the city decides to do at their direction and to operate the system effectively. We are responsible for meeting permit requirements by DEP, and the lease also includes other requirements that are more stringent than what the permits require. So if we need to treat at a level of X by the permit, the city requires us to treat even below that through the lease, and that's our obligation. Is there a question?
Yeah. How is it possible for the city to meet the compliance order while LCA is responsible for the permit requirements? Are those two separate and distinct functions?
They are. The permit is issued by DEP and relates to treatment and the effluent quality, the treated discharge that goes out into the environment, where the administrative order is issued by EPA and it relates to the use of either outfall 003 or other sanitary overflows and getting those to stop happening. So they are kind of two different issues, and the city has maintained the responsibility for compliance with the AO, but we operate the plant in accordance with the permit.
And so when the system capacity, when the wet weather event happens, system capacity exceeds, who does EPA come and take to task?
They will come take the city to task. I don't want to use the term "come after" because right now it's an administrative order under consent, so we're working together with EPA on the issues. But the city maintains that responsibility. Yeah.
Thank you.
I should note that Lehigh County Authority is named in the administrative order for our piece. So this leads right into the question of what about blending? And I put this up here because I know that social media and various places I've seen this comment that LCA wants to dump raw sewage into the creek, and that's what blending is, or that's how it was characterized. And I'm hoping that has, we've gone full circle with that because the city has done quite a bit of outreach, or at least they've shared some information publicly on what blending is. But I wanted to address it here because I think that there's still some lingering questions. And to put the definition of raw sewage, just so that we're clear, raw sewage is sewage that has not been treated or processed, and that's really not what blending is about. Blending is a technology to prevent raw sewage from being discharged, and a technology that would allow all wastewater to be treated and disinfected. A couple bullet points about blending. First of all, it's not our decision, it's not our plan, because it is the city's responsibility and it's their decision to make. But we do have some understanding of what it is and how it would work. It's our understanding that blending is a common engineering practice to address wet weather flows. It's actively being permitted in other areas. And I have listed a few cities here where it's being used, and we've spoken with numerous consultants who are doing blending projects for other cities. So it is a common engineering practice. It would, as I mentioned, prevent raw sewage from being discharged. And if blending does get added to the permit for Allentown, then all discharges would be required to meet permit requirements. So, under the permit, there are certain quality parameters that we would have to meet, and we'd have to meet them in all cases, whether we're blending or not blending. And it would have to be designed to allow for that. I have a couple diagrams to show, to try to illustrate. These are from EPA, but with my notes attached to them, so it's a little goofy looking. But what happens today is that the wastewater that comes into Klein's Island goes through all stages of treatment that's listed here. So there's screening, primary clarification, biological treatment, disinfection, and then the treated effluent is discharged to the Lehigh River, meeting all permit requirements. The plant can currently handle up to 87 million gallons per day on a peak basis, but the average is about 28 to 32 million gallons per day. When it rains, we have flows that come into the plant that are well in excess of 87 million gallons per day. So we see peaking factors of 3, 4, 5 times the regular average day flow coming into the system. And in those cases where those flows exceed 87 million gallons per day, the wastewater goes outfall 003 directly to the Little Lehigh Creek, and it is not treated. and that is about 100 yards upstream of the confluence with the Lehigh River. So that's today's scenario. And then in the blending scenario, what is being looked at by the city is that flows in excess of the 87 million gallons per day would receive a modified treatment so that all flows are receiving certain stages of the treatment and disinfection, and the discharges would be blended from the two treatment trains so that they ultimately meet the permit requirements. This is the alternative to blending. It is flow equalization, and these are not to scale, it's just for illustration purposes. Flow equalization, constructing very large tanks at the Kleins Island treatment plant to hold back the flow that's coming during those peak periods. A couple bullet points about what that looks like. As I said, the flow equalization would involve diverting peak flows into these large tanks to hold onto the wastewater and treat it later. There are some issues with flow equalization that haven't really been discussed publicly, but it is operationally and I would say environmentally problematic from the standpoint of odor and pest control. Number one, if they're uncovered, having them be covered just adds cost to it, but that's an option to address it. Odor control in the city of Allentown is a major issue. Potentially there's higher electrical demands for pumping related to storing the water and pumping it later. And I think the third bullet there is one that we're really most concerned about, which is that the wet weather capacity is limited by the size of those tanks. So as large as you can build those tanks, that's as much as you can store. Anything else is going to be discharged untreated through outfall 003. So you're very much limited by what you can build on that property. And that really comes into play as well if you have a series of back-to-back storms, which we sometimes have in the summer. You have one big storm come through and you hold all this flow back in these tanks, and a day later you have another big storm that comes through and adds more flow. You don't have any place to go with it. And that's a real concern that we would have with flow equalization. And of course, the treatment plant is located right on the banks of the Little Lehigh and the Lehigh River, so the earth moving and for the construction is environmentally sensitive type issue. The other thing that is, I think, important to understand is the context in which flow equalization or blending would be used, and that would be a major rainstorm where we have flows in the Lehigh River or Little Lehigh Creek that are flooded and raging and well beyond their normal flows. And so when we look at the water quality of the discharge from either blending or flow equalization going into the river at those moments when it would be used, there is no in-stream water quality difference between those two flows. So we test the water in the river and you're using either technology, the lab can't differentiate a difference in the quality of the water between those two alternatives. So flow equalization would meet permit requirements subject to the limitations I just talked about. It is more expensive, but it would work. So it's an option and something that should be looked at in more detail. So the question was asked at our board meeting actually on Monday, maybe not in these words, but why should we do any of this? Why should we consider blending? Why should we consider flow equalization? Shouldn't we just focus on the root cause and get the rainwater out? And I think that we all agree that that would be ideal. That would be the way to go. The problem is that that kind of a project takes a really long time to do. There's over 600 miles of sewer line in the system, 70,000 homes connected, 15,000 manholes that need to be looked at. And the system age ranges from 20 years, 15 years old to 100 years old. So there's just it's a huge, huge system, and it's a huge undertaking, very expensive to do. And so for the communities that are trying to do that work, to repair the systems, get the rainwater out of the system, they're only going to be so successful in a period of time that's reasonable to achieve compliance. And then we also have that public or private property owner issue where 50% of the system is in private hands through private property owners, and how to address that piece of it. So really the whole issue of should we do blending, should we do flow equalization, how do you handle the peak flows that are coming to the plant is really an important question to be asking, and it's an important piece of the puzzle because we're not going to get there to get all the rainwater out in a reasonable period of time for a cost we can afford. Why do we care? So I said this before, that the city decides about blending, so why should we care about it? Let them decide. You know, the costs pass through us, so Lehigh County Authority doesn't really pay for it, or the communities pay for it. You know, I think it's important, though, that we take on, or take seriously our responsibility to those communities that we serve. And we do care because we're the plant operator. We need to meet the permit requirements. We need to meet the requirements of the lease. And we do bear a portion of the operating costs, so that's important to us as well, just from a financial standpoint. But most importantly, we care about the rate impact to the communities we're serving, and we are all in this for the same reason, which is to eliminate the overflows and improve environmental quality. So Lehigh County Authority's position, which we did discuss on Monday, is a challenging one to get to because it's not universally accepted that blending is the right way to go, but we do believe that it's something that's worth keeping on the table. The current engineering shows that blending will be effective in treating the wastewater and meeting permit requirements, and the in-stream water quality, as I had mentioned, is not measurably different using this alternative. And there's a big cost savings. $37 million is a lot of money to these communities. So we do believe that it is worth exploring until it's resolved. It is not currently regulatorily resolved. It's not included on our permit. So to pursue it, to see that it can be or can't be included on the permit, I think is an important question to see all the way through. And then I think the last thing is also important, that Lehigh County Authority is responsible for representing the signatories' interests, not our own interests, because we don't really have any. It's really the signatories' interests that are important, and the signatory groups that we work with are looking for the kinds of cost savings that blending would provide. So to kind of sum it up, the changes and improvements that would happen at the Allentown treatment plant, whether it's blending or flow equalization or whatever treatment alternatives are ultimately pursued, that's really the end of the pipe solution. All the wastewater that flows down to Klein's Island needs to be treated, and so we need to have a solution to that issue, but it's really a small piece of the puzzle. And much more work is needed upstream in the system to prevent, to reduce the peak flows, prevent the overflows from happening in the Parkway system and in the Little Lehigh Creek. And an integrated approach is really what's required to get to that. Ultimate goal of the integrated approach is protection of the environment, protection of the Little Lehigh Creek. So in that context, Lehigh County Authority's priorities are to work with the signatories and develop this a cost-effective and integrated program to comply with the administrative order. We do have a deadline to submit the full plan to EPA by the end of 2017. We also need to work through the cost sharing on these major projects. $428 million is a lot of money. We need to figure out how to share those costs with the communities. We want to facilitate the signatories' efforts to reduce the wet weather flows and address their I&I issues. Really important for us to maintain and enhance our own portion of the system that we actually do own and control. We would like to, we have a responsibility to represent the municipalities with Allentown, with whatever Allentown ultimately decides to pursue. And facilitating collaboration is always important. I think it's also important that we help the communities communicate effectively with their own constituents about rate impacts and also the public or private owner responsibilities that will be part of the solution. and then operating the Allentown system in a cost-effective manner that meets the requirements of regulation as well as the lease. Those are the priorities that Lehigh County Authority has in addressing this issue. Questions?
Thank you, Liesl. I see Commissioner Godfrey first. Stand up, Commissioner Godfrey.
Yes, can you, you said that blending is not essentially different water quality-wise than the other alternatives. Can you give us a better explanation of the mechanics of blending and what we're talking about? And in terms of the water quality, it looks like biologically it's safe water, but does that also hold true for the BOD, COD, and all the other parameters?
Yes.
Okay, but can you explain what the process is?
I can explain it to a degree. I'm not an engineer, so I don't want to get in the weeds and speak out of turn on the technical side of things. But the treatment process that the treatment goes through, or the wastewater goes through now, includes primary treatment, biological treatment, and disinfection. The biological treatment is really the piece that treats the high-strength type waste that comes through under normal dry day flows, and during wet weather flows, to bypass that portion of the treatment plant is going to achieve the same or similar results because the flows are so dilute with rainwater. And ultimately, if we have primary treatment and disinfection, we're going to achieve the same result in those high flow conditions. So that's it kind of in a nutshell. But I think what's really important is the context again. In those high flow situations, the discharge that's going to the river is a very, very small, minute portion of the overall amount of water flowing in the river at that time. So if the Lehigh River normally flows at 100 to 150 cubic feet per second during today, a day like today, during a rainstorm in which this kind of a system would be activated, you're talking about 5,000 to 10,000 cubic feet per second. It's a huge amount of water that's in the river at that time when these flows are going in from the plant. And so if you were to take a sample of the water in the river in those conditions, in whether you're using flow equalization or blending, the water quality would not be perceptibly different. The lab would not be able to detect the difference.
So I was always told that the solution to pollution is not dilution, but in this case, the effluent is so diluted that it's easier to treat. That's all you're saying.
Right. Right.
Liesl, if I'm right, the technical difference between the blending effluent and the normal effluent as the process is today is the biological step doesn't exist in the blending train, right? So the discharge, while it's disinfected through the blending process, actually it's of a different composition. Is that right? Because the biological treatment, actually, the discharge from that is the biological bodies, not the waste. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, but I can't go into the detail of how the biological process works. I do know, though, that the biological portion of the plant is very sensitive, and that's where the hydraulic kind of bottleneck is in the plant, because...
and the time.
Yes, exactly. So we have these large basins filled with rocks that have bugs that live on the rocks that treat the wastewater. We can only get so much flow through there before we kill the bugs. So we need to bypass it to keep the bugs alive, because that's what gives you effective treatment on a dry day.
But the whole premise, though, is the total amount of pollution that's going out is going to be much higher. But it's so diluted that the quality per milliliter, or however you're going to mention, is the same as it would be during the low water.
I think the real comparative analysis would be what is the content of the blending effluent versus the complete train in the treatment plant effluent. And then as the blended is just math, really.
We do have some the information, the specifics of the treatment quality or the effluent quality on our website. So that I think there's more detail there than I can put up on the screen or explain myself necessarily. But just to put it in perspective, you're talking about CBOD. The permit limit is 20 milligrams per liter, and under a blending scenario, the effluent discharge would be is predicted to be 8.8. So well below the permit limits, albeit potentially a bit higher than what it would be under regular full, dry day type flows.
Commissioner Schwer?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand. Are you saying that the LCA has a position on blending, or is it that it's up to your signatories or whoever you're least, in the city's case, who you're leased with? Am I right on that, or is it?
Well, we are walking the line a little bit. I think you're correct in having a little difficulty discerning what our position is. But ultimately, it's not our decision to make. But we do believe that it should be kept on the table until it's decided. That's really the position.
I guess where I'm having difficulty with that walking the line is, I think one of the things that we heard up here when the extension for the lease was being discussed was that one of the reasons why we should go with LCA is that we're going to be good stewards of our water system, good stewards of our sand. And here, it seems like LCA's position is we don't want to take a position that might hurt our signatories. We're not really, the environment comes second, the financial burden comes first. And I don't really see a difference between that and what any of those other people who are bidding for lease, the position they would have.
I think I would disagree with you, Commissioner Schwer, respectfully, that the environment is why we're doing this. And the issue of blending has been controversial because it's not well understood. But environmentally, we don't believe that blending is more detrimental than anything else. In fact, it's an improvement over what's happening today and would be an improvement over certain scenarios when flow equalization would be used. Keep in mind that if flow equalization is the other alternative that's possible, it's more expensive, and that is what it is. But in the flow equalization alternative, the limitation of that alternative could result in additional untreated raw sewage discharges to the environment under certain conditions. And so our position is we should fully investigate all the alternatives, and we think that blending is viable. Despite the controversy, we think it's viable both environmentally and financially.
Is a big part of the problem here that Allentown just simply has oversold the capacity at Klein's Island?
No, and it is not related to the Klein's Island capacity. The dry day flows like today, we're flowing 27 million gallons per day, and there's 40 million gallons of capacity at that plant. There is the capacity of the plant is still there. It's still adequate for additional growth, even if that were to happen. Where we do have capacity issues really relates more to the capacity in the lines upstream. So in Upper and Lower Macungie Township, we do have some interceptors and lines that are full even on a dry day. And so the list of projects that I gave, and I think I spoke with you a little bit about some of them at the capital plan presentation, really relate to increasing capacity of those lines, because on a dry day, if they're full, you can imagine what happens when you have a wet day and you have all that rainwater coming in. But the plant itself is not oversold.
And I guess finally, how do you reconcile keeping blending on the table when, according to a letter from the U.S. EPA dated September 30th, and citing the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, they say that blending would be inappropriate. So how does that remain on the, I mean, that seems pretty clear to me, but how does that remain on the table?
Right, and that's really where Allentown needs to kind of determine how they want to approach it from a regulatory standpoint. DEP in that letter is saying that DEP would not It's not regulatory allowed through DEP. EPA does permit blending. It's, in this case, they're saying DEP does not permit it. And, you know, whether that's regulatorily actually justified legally, that's really a question that the city is pursuing.
But you're comfortable with your position, even though you're listed as that letter's addressed to you as well as the city?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the letter came from a meeting, a joint meeting that we had, Lehigh County Authority, our signatories, and Allentown presenting the whole plan. So, you know, we're looking at it holistically, and this response letter from EPA came to us regarding the whole plan. And if you read the entire letter, it talks about the phased approach and the different ways that we're trying to manage the whole problem. And that piece of it is one piece of it that needs to be fully investigated. And so to fully investigate it, I think is only prudent.
Thank you, Commissioner Schwer. Commissioner Doherty?
Yes, where should I start? I think you have to, LCA has to provide the leadership. You are the regional authority in this, and you have to be strong, and you have to lead the way, rather than waiting for some of the signatories to do this and that. Because eventually, it's my opinion that most of the work that's going to go on will be done with, hopefully, with grants. It's not going to come out of everybody's pocket. And you're going to have to sign on to those. So,
What grants are these?
oh, yeah.
Imagine what money
There to be some that extra state money.
Yeah.
But other than the strong leadership aspect there, I think you should be leading the way. I have a whole bunch of other questions that may not be fitting into everything that's discussed here. But in terms of the I&I, even with all that money that you showed up there on the screen, you're still going to have a problem. You admitted that out in the McCungies out there in the interceptors and so forth. So will any of that work really reduce the problem out there? Or are you going to have to eventually start dealing with individual households and all those connectors that you were talking about?
Okay, that's like a multifaceted question. So the projects, let me talk about leadership first. Leadership, I think, is extremely important. And, you know, one of the reasons I agreed to come here and speak to you is because we are trying to get out in front of the issue and share the message about the holistic approach that is being planned here. And I think it is important to look at it as a whole and not as a part. So that's important. And on the Western Lehigh end of things, Lehigh County Authority has been the leader in forming the partnerships with the Western Lehigh communities and developing an approach that they can all buy into and collaborate with each other on. And that's why we have the hard numbers on the projects that are going to happen there. For the signatories to the Allentown system, we don't have the relationship there because they're not our customer, they're the city customer. And so while we can facilitate and we can suggest and we can do a little bit more than suggest, at the end of the day, those signatories need to do what they need to do, and they're going to respond in the way that they feel is most in their best interest of their communities. So we are exerting leadership to the extent that we can based on the relationships that we have through the agreements that we have. That's kind of the leadership piece. But as it relates to the actual projects and what we're going to achieve through those projects, the listing of projects, I don't know if I want to go back to them because there's a lot of detail there. We could spend all night talking about all of them. But embedded in those projects are an expansion of the facilities in the areas that currently are bottlenecked on dry days, so that we will relieve those issues through these projects, and we'll create tapping fees so that the new development that may happen will pay their fair share of that. But ultimately, to get the rainwater out, the municipalities need to do their work. It's not our system. We don't control Upper Macungie, we don't control Lower Macungie or their relationships with their customers. We can facilitate, we can guide, we can study, we can help them, and we do. But ultimately, if Upper Macungie wants to install a basement inspection program and really enforce the disconnection of some pumps and floor drains, that's going to be up to Upper Macungie or Lower Macungie or the boroughs to do. We don't have that authority. It's not our role to do that.
What percentage of the problem do you think is outside of the interceptors? The basements and the roof drainage and all the other stuff you mentioned and the leaky laterals?
So, put it in perspective, the interceptors that LCA owns and controls is 32 miles. The rest of the system is 600 miles. And then there's another 600 miles of private property stuff that we can't control. So Lehigh County Authority's portion is really, really small. And by the end of next year, when we finish our next test, what we call a test and sealed project, our whole interceptor will have been inspected and sealed. So the problem that's out in the collector systems, the municipal systems, is a very large portion, but another, at least 50% of the problem is on private property.
50%.
Commissioner Holt?
Yeah, I could just use help understanding a little bit. So with the Klein's Island treatment plant, so is all the water, or is everything going through there? I mean, is it just from Allentown, or is it from other places as well?
It's everything on that map that I had up.
Okay.
All of those communities flow into Allentown.
So then, I guess my question is, why would Allentown be deciding how water is being, or what treatment's being provided, that blending would be used for everyone else? Like, why would that be their decision to make?
It's their plant. I mean,
So
that's the nature of the agreements that all of the signatories have with Allentown. It's their plant. They decide what happens at the plant, and the costs get shared.
Okay. And so then are you representing the signatories that you, like Upper Macungie and Lower Macungie, you're representing their interest in that decision?
We're representing their interest in talking with the city. Ultimately, the city's going to do what the city's going to do. So, you know, the folks here in this room who are asking LCA to take a position on blending, fortunately or unfortunately, we can have the strongest position for or against that you might like, but ultimately we don't have a say. It is ultimately the city's decision.
So I guess historically, how has that relationship worked? I mean, this has to have come up before. I mean, it's not new that Allentown owns the plant.
Right.
So historically, there been agreement there, or has it been an adversarial relationship between the entities?
It's been mostly positive, and I would say in the last 18 months it's been very, very collaborative, and that goes to the leadership question that Mr. Dougherty was asking about, where we've been demanding, in a nice way, that the city meet with us monthly with their engineers and with their signatories so that we can collaborate on what their work they're doing and what work we're doing. And really, I would say 2 years or so ago, 3 years or so ago, we were going in different directions. But really what is so important about this holistic approach and the phased approach that we're taking is that the improvements that the city is planning to do at their plant needs to be sized and timed according to the work that we're doing upstream in our systems. And so that's all coming together in this very integrated type of approach. We could get through, I mean, my goodness, it could happen. I'm not saying it will, but it could happen that we get so much of our rainwater out of the system in phase 1 that in phase 2, the city doesn't need to build new tanks or doesn't need to do blending. I think that's really unrealistic, but it's worth, you know, doing this as an integrated way or approach so that we can do the work first on the I&I, measure, and then plan and do the next step together.
Let me, if I can, jump to the audience just very briefly. Liesl, thank you very much for your presentation. I don't want to disrespect the time that you've given us. So let me take a couple comments. Yes, Commissioner Jones. Sure.
I'd love a copy of that presentation.
Sure.
Could you forward that to Mr. Barilla?
Yes, absolutely.
Liesl, would you mind taking, or at least listening to some public input? Thank you. Would anyone like to address the board on this topic? Not address Liesl, but address the board.
You want to address the board?
Well, that's moving on.
What's the difference between, I'd like to address Liesl and the board.
Rob, I'm sorry, if you can go to the microphone,
Yeah, sure.
whatever. Okay.
There's a fear that this blending could set a legal precedent, around the state. The DEP doesn't allow it, and that could lead to blending on the upper Little Lehigh instead of putting catch basins there. The Little Lehigh has enough sewage overflow as it is. I wouldn't want to see a catch basin replace, I wouldn't want to see that this blending replace a catch basin, so I hope you use that. Even if you do, some sort of catch basin with infiltration, that would be good. As far as the infiltration, you said that you get 2 to 4 million gallons per day in your lines?
The whole system.
All 600? Okay. Would lining the tanks, or would lining your pipes cause a significant change in the amount of water that goes into the pipes and out of the aquifer?
Can I get up?
Yes, and Rob, and whoever else might like to address or talk to this topic. I don't want to occupy too much more time. We can always, if Liesl, you would agree to this, if you can email questions to Liesl directly.
Okay. Okay, and finally, there were 15 overflow events this year along the Little Lehigh Creek. I live along the Little Lehigh Creek. The last time I swam and put my head underwater was 3 years ago when I got an eye infection. Can you give warnings to the downstream users when there is a sewer overflow event upstream from us?
I think it's,
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
May I answer the last one first, because I remember it. The issue with the overflows is that they're happening at times when you should not be swimming. I mean, I'm not saying that to be glib, but they're happening at times when the river or the creek is so surcharged because of the rain event that is happening, that it is not a time that people would be out recreating in the water.
Unless you're a whitewater kayaker.
I can't speak to that, but I mean, the times that it does happen, we had one incident at the end of February this year where 13 overflows happened at 13 out of the 15 happened from that one incident, and it was, 6 inches of rain that fell in an afternoon, and so there's not recreation happening unless you were, I mean, I can't speak to what your activities are. But that to be able to do downstream notification when those are happening is really not something that responsibly we can commit to, because we don't often know that they're happening until after they've happened. After the storm has receded and we do our inspections and we see evidence that it's happened, that's when we know it's happened. The ones that we do know that are happening are down at Kleins Island at Outfall 003. So. Maybe not the answer that you're looking for, but that's kind of where it is. The other question that you asked was related to lining the system and whether that would significantly reduce the groundwater getting in. And I think that is a case-by-case type of situation that needs to be looked at, because simply lining the lines, if you don't address the sewer laterals, can have the opposite effect that you're looking for. Because so much of the problem is on the sewer laterals or on private property. If you're lining the sewer line but not addressing that, then you force more rainwater into the leaks that are in the sewer lateral. So every situation needs to be looked at very specifically and engineered and addressed specifically.
Would blending set a legal precedent across the state?
Blending is already happening in the state. It's happening in the city of Bethlehem. They're using blending at their plant to prevent overflows into the street in Freemansburg. Instead, they blend. or actually they have an actual outfall that is permitted. So this is happening in Pennsylvania. But to get to your issue or your question about the upper reaches of the Little Lehigh, I think that's really important to address, because under no circumstance have we looked at, contemplated, or asked for any kind of blending in the Little Lehigh. The control of flows upstream would be through improvements to the system that we have, flow equalization basins, like we do already have one in Vogelsville, or those kinds of things. So blending is not being contemplated in any way, shape, or form in the Little Lehigh.
Thank you, Lisa. Joe, do you have a couple questions?
Well, general, but it's for the board. Yeah, Joe Hilliard, South Allentown. What we have is a capacity problem. And I keep hearing, well, we have a capacity problem. Sure, we have a capacity problem because it rains. It's ridiculous. It's a water system. It's a sewage system. And contrary to constantly hearing, no, nothing's been oversold, it's a whispered but open secret for years that the current administration did oversell capacity because it's desperate for revenue. But the official stance is, no, we have plenty of capacity, but it rains and everything overflows. Doesn't make sense. What I would ask this board to do is, and again, as I said on other issues, I'm willing to help, I'll crunch numbers, whatever, but we need a detailed capacity analysis. We need to know where all the bottlenecks are. We need to know if it all runs into Klein's Island, how everything looks before that. We need to know what the signatories actually are paying for. What is the capacity of Klein's Island? It was my understanding that you could only sell 80%. That way, when it rains, you have overflow. You know, or if you have a 5-gallon bucket, you don't fill it to 5 gallons and then be upset when it rains and it overflows. So I'm not comfortable without seeing the data what this real situation is, because it's just glib. But we have plenty of capacity, but we're always overflowing. When again, with sources within the city and even some of the signatory governments, it's been indicated to me it's an open secret. Why would the signatories agree to that? Because they don't want to pay for expansion, which is the issue why we're talking about blending. It benefits them if South Whitehall explodes development. They don't want to have to pay for the consequences of that. So it's kind of been an incestuous relationship. So I would ask this board to undertake some steps to really get a handle on the capacity of this system, because that is the big problem. It's been mentioned for years that, well, LCA can't control expansion. I've heard it at board meetings, other meetings, offline, everything else. Yeah, they can. And this was brought up when the charter issue extension came up. I was urging this board to institute some checks and balances to uncontrolled expansion. Because they do control growth. Because it's my understanding most of the municipalities do not allow a development unless there are existing sewer lines in place, which LCA magically built several years before, and now another development can build it. So we have to really, if we have a capacity problem, the first step is to really halt expansion. So we got a host of issues here, and I think we're dancing around the graveyard. You know, we're going to run around and patch up sump pumps and basement drains when the problem is much, much, much bigger than that. I'm not saying that's not a contributing factor, but I'd be surprised if it's half the issue. And if it is, put meters at the municipality lines and charge them for their discharge. If they're exceeding 5 times, charge them for it. It sounds like a much simpler solution to me. So I hope this board can help institute a some comprehensive guidance for the LCA, because you still do maintain control over the LCA. That's another myth. So I hope this board starts exerting some control, because we got major, major problems. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. I'd like to allow just a couple more comments. We've been on this subject for almost an hour, and we do need to move on. But Jan?
I'll be very short, if I can. Address the blending issue. It is against state regulations. those regulations by DEP, and thank God they're enforcing one, were put in place to protect our streams and prevent pollution. So blending, right, they do not approve any sewer discharges without biological control. That is the law. All right, so we're flying in face of the law here. Whether other communities do it, I don't know what kind of laws they have, but I think I'm going to report them. And this second thing is on the problems with the Little Lehigh. For 45 years, that's half my lifetime, I have watched the deterioration of that Little Lehigh stream go from a high-quality cold water fishing stream with natural trout propagation down to the last study done about 4 years ago, where the stream now has a distinction of attaining non-recreational use. In lay terms, no human contact. Why? Because the E. coli and pollution in the stream, and that is a matter of a study, which I have copies of. So I have watched the stream deteriorate from 1972. Why then? That's when the Western Interceptor was put in. That stream has overflowed all these years, and it's not being addressed. I&I is one thing. The federal study shows I&I is 0 to 30% effective. It's not cost effective. And that was a study done on I&I by EPA, which I have a copy of. All right, the other thing is it is overcapacity and has been overcapacity. We're putting too much into the line. We continue to put in a line that can't hold it. I&I is not going to address the issue. It's a Band-Aid approach that's been used every time somebody raises their voice about what's happening to the stream. In 1980, the state sent a letter to Southbury Township Sewer Authority about the interceptor. At that time, there were only 900 EDUs, hookups, left in the line in the Western Interceptor. In 1980, how many additions, how many hookups have been added to that line since then? It's overcapacity. They have been neglected to do their duty and put in a parallel line that will really solve the overflows into the Little Lehigh. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
John Dodges, he may, just had a question too, as far as if there's problems with the leaks in the whole system. This is everywhere. When there's lots of water going out, you know, for the infiltration for the rainwater, what happens when it's okay and just regularly flowing? I don't think those leaks seal up, so it probably goes out. Are there, I don't know, brownfield problems in the future, and every water line and sewer line that goes through the whole county and towns and everything? Just wondering if there's anything, studies like that.
Well, John, I think that's a good question, and if I allow Lisa to just answer that one last question, then we could wrap it up. But it's a good one, because it's, Lisa?
Yep, I'll answer to the best that I can. The system that we have does have leakage, and you know, so the rainwater that gets into the system during rainstorms is the real evidence that you're seeing. But on a regular dry day, which I think is what you're asking about, what we're really seeing is that groundwater is still getting into the pipes. And I'll give you the kind of some figures to talk about. During a regular period of regular rainfall and regular groundwater conditions, we'll see average day flows to Klein's Island in the range of 31 to 32 million gallons per day. Right now, we're seeing 27. That's a 5 million gallon per day difference because groundwater levels are so low. So that's how much groundwater on a regular day is getting into the system. You know, 3 to 5 million gallons per day of groundwater getting into the system. It's not leaking out, it's leaking in. That's the evidence that we have.
Thank you, Lisa. I'd like to thank everyone for participating in the discussion, and Lisa, thank you especially for the time that you've given us to educate us and also answer some questions along the way. Thank you. That brings us to the next agenda item, and Mary, I'm going to apologize up front. Of course, when you move to the area, you'll know a whole lot more about our wastewater systems. But if I had realized, I'm sorry, if I had thought ahead, I would have taken your appointment ahead of time. Mr. Clerk, would you please introduce the appointment we have before us this evening?
It's an appointment to the position of Director of Corrections, Ms. Mary E. Sable.
Thank you. Commissioner Brace?
Yes, at our last meeting, the Governance Committee recommended the appointment of Ms. Sable as Director of Corrections. Little history, current Director of Corrections, Ed Sweeney, announced his retirement effective sometime in January. I can't remember the exact date, but I'm sure Mr. Sweeney remembers. Mr. Sweeney has served Lehigh County for many years with incredible distinction. He brought Ms. Sable to us. She's currently with York County, has served that county for, I believe, 17 years is the number that stuck out in my mind. So without further comment, I'll move the appointment of Ms. Sable as Director of Corrections.
Motion by Commissioner Brace.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Holt. Any other commissioner comments? No comment, Commissioner Schwartz.
No, I do.
Okay.
Just, she has Ed Sweeney's recommendation, which is good enough for me.
Thank you. Any other commissioner comments? Mary, would you like to address the board before we take a vote on your appointment? Stop. You don't have to. You came all this way. For so long. Okay. All those in favor of approving the appointment of Mary Sable to the Director of Corrections in Lehigh County, please say aye.
Aye.
Mary, your appointment is made unanimously.
Now may I say something?
Absolutely.
And it'll be brief.
All right.
No more than half an hour.
I just want to take a moment to thank you for the opportunity. I'm really looking forward to coming on board and, continuing on the best practices that Ed and his staff have done, and I'm pretty progressive and aggressive in pursuing new policies and procedures that will benefit the correctional arena in the county. So thank you again.
Thank you, Mary. Commissioner Dougherty?
I only want to know what you're going to do about the I&I in the first.
No comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your patience in waiting through that whole thing. Mr. Clerk, would you please introduce the first of the resolutions before us this evening?
Resolution 2016-63, approving a professional services agreement with Forensic Pathology Associates, a division of Health Network Laboratories, sponsored by Commissioner Creighton.
Thank you. Madam Solicitor?
The purpose of this resolution is to approve a professional services agreement with Forensic Pathology Associates to provide autopsy and related services to the office of the coroner. Resolution approval is required under section 801.1 of the Administrative Code.
Thank you. Commissioner Creighton?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, in our committee meeting, we had Coroner Scott Grimm highly recommended this company, so that's all I have.
Thank you. Any other commissioner comments? Any public input? All those in favor of approving Resolution 2016-63, please say aye.
Aye.
Resolution passes unanimously. Mr. Clerk, would you please introduce Resolution 2016-64?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Resolution 2016-64. A motion would need to be made that the 60-day advance written notice requirement in Section 801.e of the Administrative Code be waived and reduced to 41 days for the contract with Tyler Technologies, Inc. If that motion is not made, the resolution will be procedurally deferred.
Is there any commissioner who would like to make that motion?
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Hartzell. Is there a second? Motion dies on lack of a second. This resolution is deferred to our next meeting. Mr. Clerk, would you please introduce Resolution 2016-65?
Resolution 2016-65, authorizing the Lehigh County General Purpose Authority to undertake a project for Muhlenberg College, sponsored by Commissioner Schwer.
Thank you. Madam Solicitor?
The purpose of this resolution is to authorize the Lehigh County General Purpose Authority to undertake a project for Middleburg College and issue bonds on the college's behalf and its interest with the board's authority under 4.5B of the rules of the board.
Thank you. Sponsor comments?
Yes, during committee, we heard that the primary parts of this are refinancing of existing debt as well as improvements to the heating system. And it came out of committee with a favorable recommendation.
Thank you. Any other commissioner comments? One thing I might add that didn't actually come out in committee is through this transaction, when it's completed, the county will benefit by commanding a 20 basis points on 20-some million dollars. So that's an equivalent of about $40,000 that will be into the county's coffers for economic and community development, or any other purposes that are appropriate at the time. So it's a benefit of about $30,000 to the county. Any other commissioner comments? Any public input? All those in favor of approving resolution 2016-65, please say aye. Aye. Resolution passes unanimously. Mr. Clerk, would you please introduce the first of the bills before us this evening?
Bill 2016-25 has been withdrawn by the sponsors.
Second bill?
Bill 2016-26, approving the collective bargaining agreement between the County of Lehigh and PSSU SEIU Local 668 and transferring funds to implement same, sponsored by Commissioners Osborne, Brace, and Dougherty.
Thank you. Madam Solicitor?
The purpose of this ordinance is to approve the collective bargaining agreement between the County of Lehigh and PSSU SEIU Local 668 and transferring funds to implement the same. Ordinance approval is required under Section 310A11 of the Home Rule Charter.
Thank you. Sponsor comments. Commissioner Dougherty or Brace?
I will just say it was a tough negotiation. We had good people on both teams, and we reached an amicable agreement. We didn't get everything we wanted. They didn't get everything they wanted, but we're getting closer together here, and this may have been one of the longest standoffs in contract history, but finally we got to the settlement point. The only thing that I would like to add that I did not say in committee is that I do not think other unions should use this as a footprint for what they want to do. PSSU has been without increase in quite a few years, so this is making up for lost time. So some people may look at this and say that we were overly aggressive in the pay increase, but they've been waiting a long time for this, and so it's making up for lost time. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dougherty. Commissioner Brace?
The only thing that I might add, well, this has been ongoing. I'm glad we haven't gotten to the point with this particular bargaining unit that some of the Philadelphia units have seen, going on in 2009 in some cases. I'm grateful for the negotiating process and glad that we can put this to rest and serve the people who are served by this office, which is children and youth caseworkers. Can't overlook the importance of the children and youth casework that this unit does provide coverage for. So that's where our focus should be, and I'm glad the negotiation comes to a close so the focus can remain there.
Thank you, Commissioner Brace. And for those in the audience who maybe weren't here in committee, I'll repeat just a little bit of what I said in committee, and that is I think this was a good negotiation in terms of we really did discuss across the table what our priorities and needs are for both parties, and I think we did that in an atmosphere which kept us going and got us to an end point. It's not a perfect solution or agreement perhaps in both parties' eyes, but I think that's one of the reasons why it's a good one, because we each achieved something that we would like to achieve, and the next negotiation would be a continuation of that. So I'd also like to maybe repeat a comment that Commissioner Schwer said. We also appreciate your patience. It has been a long time, as you said. We weren't actually the first negotiating party, so this goes back 2 years, 3 years, something like that, 3 years. So I think especially, you know, because it's been so long in coming, I look forward to this actually being passed by our board in our next meeting, and I would ask our board to look favorably upon it. Any other commissioner comments? Any public input?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's good we can move on, because we need our county workers, obviously. One question, though, I didn't see a contract out there. Was there one out there and I missed it? I have the ordinance, but...
Yeah, no, you're right, Joe. The actual collective bargaining agreement body is not available tonight, but it will be before our next meeting and the vote. It was just signed, actually, earlier this afternoon.
Okay, all right, congratulations, but yeah, I would like a chance to review that before the next meeting. I don't know if you could post it online, or, because frankly, I think all the collective bargaining agreements should be posted.
It'll be on our website next to that
agenda. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other? Commissioner Holt?
Well, I would just say, I don't know when the agenda will get posted. It would be helpful if maybe even it could be retroactively posted to this agenda item as well.
As soon as I get it, Commissioner Holt.
Then people could access it there, and then when our next agenda is posted, it'll be with that as well. So they have more time. Okay.
Any other public input? Okay, hearing none, Bill 2016-25 has received its first reading and is scheduled for a vote in our next meeting, which is actually Wednesday, December 21st, next Wednesday. Mr. Clerk, would you please introduce the next of bills 2016-26?
Commissioner Bill 2016-27 amends the Articles of Incorporation of the Lehigh County General Purpose Authority to extend the term of existence of the authority for 50 years. That's sponsored by Commissioner Schwer and Briggs.
Thank you. Madam Solicitor?
The purpose of this ordinance is to approve an amendment to the Articles of Incorporation of the General Purpose Authority, which extends the term of its existence, and ordinance approval is required under 310A and 302J of the Home Rule.
Thank you. Sponsor comments, Commissioner Schwer?
Yes, we heard in committee that I believe the current charter is running out in 2047. This would, recharge it to the full 50 years, and they wanted to be able to really service loans in the future for the life. So,
thank you, Commissioner Briggs.
Yeah, one of the reasons why it's being requested at this point, with 31 years left on the charter, many of the institutions, being hospitals, colleges, so on and so forth, are looking for their financing terms to be 30 years. So anytime that their charter runs inside of 30 years, it compromises their ability to assist with the financing. So this serves the institutions in our community. I think this is a good thing for us to extend so that the financing opportunities can exist for those institutions.
Thank you, Commissioner Briggs. This is only a money-producing entity. It's an all-volunteer board and no expense to the county. So it's a good board. It's a good authority. Any other commissioner comments? Any public input? Bill 2016-27 has received its first reading and is scheduled for a vote in our next meeting. Are there any committee reports this evening? Commissioner Holt.
I believe, I don't know when it was appropriate, but we had a motion that we were interested in making out of the administrative committee meeting. Maybe that would be a good time to do that. I move that the board authorize the chair of the board to relay the concerns of the board to Tyler and seek a response.
second.
There's a motion on the floor, seconded by Commissioner Doherty. Any comments? Commissioner input? Commissioner Schwer?
Just so everyone knows what's going on, this deals with the agenda item previously, which was approving a professional services agreement with Tyler Technologies for the new ERP system. They have provided us with a full copy of the contract. Unfortunately, they have also redacted some portions of that contract for the public. many members of the board have an issue with that, and that's why we're asking Tyler to hopefully unredact what they've redacted, and make it available to the public, or if not, provide the legal basis for not unredacting that.
Thank you, Commissioner Swear. Any other commissioner comments? Commissioner Dougherty.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what I said in committee, that we try to operate as openly as possible, and we want to be as transparent as we can be. And putting something online with so many portions redacted is not very transparent. It sends the wrong message. So many of the aspects in there that are redacted look like they're financial to me, which are not. That doesn't make a good reason for redacting something. And I also mentioned that this is also possibly a ploy by larger corporations to try to keep the prices up so that we're not sharing financial information with other counties. I hope that's not the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Dougherty. Any other commissioner comments? Any public input?
Yes, thank you. Joe Hilliard, South Allentown. Yeah, I skimmed over this, and I got some concerns. Well, I was hoping to skim over the SEIU contract too, but it wasn't there. It says Exhibit F and E is statement of work and functional requirements. Yeah, while some of the stuff in there might be intellectual property, I find it hard to believe the entire section would qualify for being exempted under the right to know law. And then Exhibit A, the line item pricing, and I'm looking at the sales quotation. I don't know if that has stuff missing. They got a lot of line items there and just totals. Nothing financial can be withheld from the public. In fact, Easton School District lost a case at the state Supreme Court where they settled the case, and you have your typical non-disclosure agreement. The state Supreme Court ruled, no, it's a financial transaction. You cannot work to evade the right to know law. And I would take it one step further. Some of you are aware of the detail I do review things. I would consider the lack of line item pricing as violating the Sunshine Act because it prohibits me from commenting. So any action you take could be null and void anyway. So I just want to make the board aware of that, and you know I'm not one of idle statements. Let's just leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Would anyone else like to comment on the motion before us? Hearing no further comment, all those in favor of approving the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Commissioner Holmes. At this point, let me ask, are there any other motions for the board to consider? Any committee reports?
I'll just provide another brief update, and maybe our clerk would do better at this, but we are making progress in getting all the documents scanned and looking at maybe drawing at least a phase of that to conclusion over the holidays here. So we should be looking forward to in the new year seeing the results of this work, and appreciate the work that our office has been doing to facilitate that.
Sure, I'll just quickly expand the ordinances from home rule to the present, and the resolutions are all scanned. The next phase will be to put those into the board docs library, while our board minutes are collected and submitted to the vendor for scan.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Any other committee reports? Commissioner Jones?
I'd like to give an update to the board in regards to the pay study initiative. We were able to meet a week and a half ago. Yes, okay. In the very recent past, with all the key elected officers, key department heads and stakeholders to discuss what we saw as the collective challenges with our current pay system and what we thought the priorities were. Commissioner Holt has formulated all of that dialogue in the way that she can do into a document. What we hope to do in our next steps is to meet with the other commissioners in small groups that don't violate the Sunshine Law. The whole idea out of those conversations is to get a consensus on what are the critical inputs that will go into the study. We didn't want to take that next step without getting the input from everybody in terms of what we felt the priorities were. Better the inputs, better the outputs from the study. And we'll be looking to do that over the next couple of weeks. If we need to do it by conference call versus face-to-face, I think that might be the fastest way for us to get everybody together. So you'll be hearing more.
Thank you, Commissioner Jones. Any other committee reports? Any citizens' input on the committee reports? Any commissioner announcements?
Mr. Chairman, you mentioned that our next meeting is December 21st, next Wednesday. That's the last meeting of 2016. January 3rd at 7:30, Tuesday, January 3rd, will be the organizational meeting of the board. The first meeting of the board will be Wednesday, January 11th, and the rest of the schedule will be set January 3rd.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Commissioner Schwer?
I have two announcements. First, back in August, I serve as the Commissioner Liaison to the Police Athletic League. Back in August, I was asked if I would consider serving on their board as an individual, in an individual capacity, which I told them I'd be happy to. Unbeknownst to me, they only meet twice a year, and unbeknownst to me, at the September meeting, when I was here at the budget hearing, they went ahead and did that. The correspondence caught up with me between our last meeting and this meeting, so I wanted to let everyone know about it. And if I don't see it as an impediment to continuing to serve as liaison if the board wants me to, but I just wanted to let everyone know. So that was announcement number one. Number two, I don't want to beat up on Mr. Mulchaney anymore, but since it only happens every 14 years, I did want to mention that Army beat Navy.
Yeah, well, once every 14 years. It's like the gypsy law.
Just wait.
I like that. I like that. I don't know that Navy's ranked anymore after that loss.
Once out of 15 years.
Any citizens' input on a non-agenda item? Okay, hearing none, I will entertain a motion for the board to go into executive session.
I move that the Board of Commissioners adjourn the public portion of this meeting and reconvene in executive session for the purpose of discussing labor negotiations. The board will not come back into public session this evening to take any action.